Okay, so now I want us to look at some examples of a paired passage and what you're going to be working on today. So when you get to a paired passage like in a test or usually in the directions, it's going to say read the next two selections. Selections meaning stories. And so you're going to notice here, so we have one page. Oh, hold on. Here we go. We have one page of this story or two. And then we have another story here. You're going to notice this page didn't have any directions because it goes with the other story there. After the second story, you're going to see where it says, use Ricochet, the dog who surfs to raise funds, to answer questions 13 through 16. So right there, it's going to tell you what story to use to answer what questions, okay? When you keep going, so right there, I would label that with a big 1 because that is the first story. I would go back and I would label this first story with a 1. So I know the first story goes with the first set of questions. I would go ahead and label confetti with a 2 and then go find the questions. And you notice right here, use confetti to answer questions 17 through 20. And I would label these with a 2. So I know these questions go with story 2. When you're done, you're going to see these directions. Use Ricochet and confetti to answer questions 21 through 24. So I want us to look at not necessarily what are the answers to these questions, but I want you to see how they ask paired passage questions about how both stories are the same and how they're different. So look at this one. One difference between them. So I have to think, okay, how are these stories different? One was about a dog, one was about a horse. That's what I know already. And so I would think about that before I answered it. Both selections express the importance of. So both stories say this, or both stories say that. Which sentence best describes a difference? So right here, Ricochet required training, but confetti did not. And I would have to think to myself, did Ricochet have to be trained or did he just know how to do that? And I could mark out those key words like maybe he didn't have to be trained. He just knew what to do. And again, what was another difference between them? So we're going to have a practice question like that today. I just wanted you to see what it might look like on a test or on a passage if you were to get it. Now today's story is going to be a little more fun because it is Halloween and it's a shorter story because I want us practicing the skill, not necessarily practicing do I know how to do it yet. So we're going to have a nonfiction paired text. Remember, paired means two stories. One is called The History of Halloween, and the other one is called La Dia de los Muertos. I don't speak Spanish. I probably said it wrong. It just means Day of the Dead. Okay. So I notice here's my first story. And then I'm going to go down and we're going to ignore these questions because I made some for you. And here's my second story, History of Day of the Dead. So I know I have two stories and some questions, and we are going to have paired questions. So you're going to pause this video and you're going to read these two stories. And then you're going to come back and we're going to talk about the questions. So go ahead and push pause, and then I will meet you at the questions when you're ready. All right, so you have read the two stories and you are ready to attack these questions. So you notice here at the top, I put the title of for each story really big, and I put a little symbol for each story so you know which story went with which questions. So we're not really going to talk about these questions, History of Halloween or Day of the Dead, because I think you can probably attack those pretty well on your own. But we are going to talk about these two paired questions. So this is the strategy I want you to use. The reader can conclude from both stories that what? So I need to think, from both stories, the answer that I choose has to happen in both stories. So this is what you do. You're going to use what we call checks and X's. So, in the first story, does it talk about traditions started many years ago? I think it did. I think it said that. So I'm just going to put, for typing sakes, because I'm just going to put a V. Okay. And in the second story, that's a check, by the way. That V is a check. It's a big check mark. In the second story, Day of the Dead, does it talk about traditions started many years ago? Yeah, I think it does. So I'm going to put another check mark. If I have two checks like that, that probably means the answer is correct. So let's go to the second one. In the first story, do ghosts come alive on October 31st? Yeah, that's what they believe. So I'm going to put a check mark. In the second story, did the ghost come alive? No, because in the second story, it said they celebrated their life, not that they came back to life. So I would put an X there. Since there's an X there, that means that cannot be my answer because it does not go with both stories. Do both stories use sugar skulls to celebrate their people? In the first story, it said that they dressed up to hide, that they didn't celebrate. So that would be an X. In the second story of Day of the Dead, they did use sugar skulls to celebrate their people. And so that would be a check mark. But unfortunately, I have an X and a check, so that's not going to work. Both of them dress up for the occasion. Let me think about that. In the first story, did they dress up? Yeah, they did that to hide. And then in the second story, did it say that they dressed up? No, it said that they decorated their skulls. So therefore, that one would not work. So did you see how I went through each answer choice and I thought to myself, did this happen in the first story? Did this happen in the second story? Checks for the first one, X for the first one. Check for the second one, X for the second one. So let's look at the second story. And I want you to do this one on your own. History of Halloween differs. That means it's different from Day of the Dead because. So I want you to go through just like we did on the first one and say, History of Halloween is about celebrating the dead. Is that a check or is that an X? While Day of the Dead's about wearing costumes. Is that a check or is that an X? And so I want you to go through each of those and think checks and X's. So when I grade your slideshow, I need to see that you can do V's, or if you want to insert an image for your checks and X's or whatever. But on each answer choice, you should have either two checks, two X's, or an X and a check. Okay? So I think you can do that. This was just a quick introduction of a paired passage. We're going to start doing these more as we go. And you are going to have at the bottom of this an open-ended questions where you are going to type and you're going to tell me, what did these two stories have in common, and then one way they were different, so that you're thinking about and connecting the two stories together.